Hey, what's up you guys? I have just recently finished the final book by the Brontë sisters that I had left, and that was Shirley by Charlotte Brontë, and I have now officially read every single book by all three sisters. So today I'm going to be ranking them from my least favourite to my most favourite. If you disagree with my list, that's fine. Be respectful and let me know down below why. But I'm just going to get straight into it because there's 8 books to talk about. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and please subscribe, and let's get started. Book number 8 is Stancliffs Hotel by Charlotte Brontë, and I didn't actually know if I should include this or not. It was never officially meant to be published. This was part of her juvenilia, so she wrote it when she was an inexperienced writer, and it was never meant to be published. It was just kind of for fun for her when she was learning her writing style. And it is a very confusing read. It doesn't have much of a plot. It is part of her wider Angria tales that she used to write, and it follows a man arriving at a hotel, meeting an old friend, the two of them going around the town, meeting different people and observing things. And it's very confusing, and it's not a proper real book, so I didn't even really want to include it, but I thought I would. So it's number 8 / it's kind of like a special mention, and that is Stancliffs Hotel. Book number 7 is Shirley, also by Charlotte Brontë, and this follows two young women, Catherine and Shirley, who are friends and are seemingly in love with the same man. It is set in the background of the Industrial Revolution, and that starts off being like a really big focus of the book. However, it kind of trickles away and is never fully resolved. There's two storylines of the women and their relationship and the Industrial Revolution. They just don't interconnect well. They don't really wrap up properly, and there is some great moments in this book. However, it is just far too long. The majority of it was a slog. I had to use an audiobook to listen to it because I physically couldn't read it because I just thought it was so boring. And apart from Shirley, all of the main characters are just bland and forgettable. It's just a very forgettable book. I only finished it like 3 days ago, and I already don't remember much about it because I just honestly thought it was pretty boring. Number 6 is Villette, also by Charlotte Brontë, and this follows Lucy Snow, who goes from England to the fictional town of Villette in Belgium to be an English teacher. There she falls in love with another teacher, and the story kind of goes from there. The main character Lucy spends a lot of time observing people and observing things and not actually being an active participant in her own story. She's more of a spectator, and she is really, really boring as well. She is not an interesting character, especially for a main narrator. She is so boring. Charlotte writes Villette as a French-speaking town, which means that most of the characters there speak in French. So you have to constantly refer to the back of the book if you want to word for word know what the characters are saying. I done this for this first half of the book, and then the second half I was sick of doing it, so I kind of just guessed through my little French knowledge I have, and also just, what was going on around the speech. So it's very difficult to read at points because it's tiring to read. The love interest was so unlikable, not even in the way that I'll discuss later on for another book where you like him because he's unlikable. He's just not a likable character. And there's a lot of plot conveniences in this book, which happens semi-regularly in Charlotte's books. But again, this book is just far too long. There's so many religious debates that go on, and it's just not necessary. It just pads out the book, and it just makes it drag on and on and on. And there was whole sections where you could skip a chapter and the story wouldn't change, you wouldn't miss anything, and it was just like a very boring, long book. In number 5, we have The Professor, also by Charlotte Brontë, and this is in some ways a gender-swapped Villette. It follows a professor in a school in Belgium who falls in love with another teacher. This book was never published while Charlotte was alive, and she took the elements of this story and transformed it into Villette, which was published while she was alive. I actually like The Professor more because it is much more condensed. It is the same basic story, but much shorter. A lot of the religious debates I just complained about aren't in it. It's much more straightforward and to the point, and it makes for an easier read and honestly a more enjoyable read, in my opinion. It's essentially the same story but from the male's point of view, and the teacher and the love interest, they're both much more likeable in this book than in Villette as well. The female one is not boring like Lucy Snow is, and the male one is not as unlikable as the one in Villette. I can't remember their names. So it's essentially the same story but more condensed and more enjoyable. And number 4, we have Agnes Gray by Anne Brontë, and this follows Agnes, who is one of the most pure, kind-hearted characters of all time, as she becomes a governess for 2 different families. The families are not great. The first one treat her horribly, the second one are better, but they're still flawed in their own ways. This book deals with the topic of toxic masculinity, which obviously was not a phrase back then when this was written. However, it talks about how women are seen in society and their place in society, and how men have to act in society. For example, there's a young boy in the first family who kills animals for fun. He kills baby birds and what else does he kill? He kills different animals, and he does it because his father says it's manly. Like, Agnes tells him to stop, and the father says no, like, men are allowed to kill animals. Like, it's things like that. It explores those kind of themes, and it was done really, really well. All the characters are extremely fleshed out, the good ones and the bad ones. They're very unique own characters, and you really grow, like I said, to be attached to Agnes, and you're really rooting for her to get out of these horrible situations. She falls in love, obviously, near the end of the novel, but the love story isn't actually the main focus. The main focus is just on her and her journey, as she remains a pure, kind person in a world that treats her horribly. The number 3 spot is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, and this is about a woman, Helen, who moves to a small village with her son, and there she becomes a social outcast because rumours are spread about the reason that she is so reclusive and hiding away in Wildfell Hall. As the story progresses, we learn that she had a very abusive alcoholic husband and she has fled him, and we learn the reasons why. This book was very, very interesting because it is a very raw portrayal of alcoholism and domestic abuse and domestic violence at a time where these were extremely taboo subjects. These are still taboo subjects today, but back then when The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was written, they were like not spoken about at all. Helen goes against society's norms and even the laws of the time by fleeing her husband and essentially socially divorcing him. This was not allowed. You weren't allowed to do that. And she also sells art, which is also illegal back then because she is taking supplies from her husband. So really it's his supplies and she can't make money from his supplies, if that makes sense. And it is just a very, very feminist novel in the best way. Helen is an amazing character. You, like I've said for Agnes in the last book, you just root for her so much. You want her to get out of this awful situation. There's a point where she returns to her husband for various reasons, and then you just see how horrible he is and how he tries to destroy her relationship with her son, and you just want the best for her. All the characters in this, again, are so just well fleshed out. You really grow attached to them all, even the bad ones again, like the alcoholic, abusive husband. You really not feel for him, but you really grow attached to just every single character in the book, and it was a very groundbreaking story for its time. In number 2, we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. This is a multi-generational story about 2 families and the marriages and relationships that ultimately destroy them. All of the characters are so fascinating. They are all horrible people. You have Heathcliff and Cathy and Catherine and just a whole host of characters which you grow to love, even though they all do really despicable things to each other, and you just can't wait to see what happens next. The isolated gothic setting of this book is like the cherry on top. It is so perfect. It just completely makes the atmosphere of the book work and bring all of the different elements together. The characters are lonely and uncivilized because they're all living out in the Yorkshire moors, and there's basically just Wuthering Heights and then another house which the other family live in, and they only really have each other. So it's so fascinating. It's genuinely funny at times as well. I actually laughed out loud at some points of this book, which never happens. I don't ever do that, but for some reason in Wuthering Heights there's some really genuinely funny moments. My favourite character is Nellie Dean, who is the main narrator, and she was a housekeeper for the family in Wuthering Heights, and she gets herself involved in all of the different situations and she causes so much trouble, and she is the reason that I love kind of like the meddling maids and meddling servants trope that happens in a lot of like older classics and books set in like the 1800s. I just think that's so fascinating, and I absolutely just love everything about Wuthering Heights. I am going to reread it in January and I can't wait. In the number 1 spot, I have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë, to absolutely nobody's surprise if you are actually a regular watcher of my channel. I talk about this book all the time. It is a fictional autobiography of our main character Jane, following her life through school and then her time working as a governess, where she falls in love with the owner of the house she works at, Mr. Rochester. Jane Eyre is one of the best characters I've ever read about. She stands up for herself at a time where women were not expected to or really allowed to, and she perseveres through so many hardships in life. So many bad things happen to her and she always picks herself back up and always gets on top and always lands on her feet. She is just one of those characters that you just want to be. Like, she's honestly an inspiration to everyone. It has all my favourite tropes. So it has like the slightly gothic manor house, it has the meddling house staff that I just talked about, the servants and stuff who are getting involved. There's rich people with dark secrets that become revealed later on, and it is just so perfect in every single way. Her relationship with Mr. Rochester is one for the ages. You probably shouldn't support it. It's toxic, I guess you would say, but you can't help but love it. In real life, you would never support it, but in a fictional setting, it is just one of those relationships that just work perfectly. And there is a moment, I don't know if I should say it. There's a sentence in this book that is just like one of the most iconic sentences in the English literature, language, history. It is just an amazing book. And that was my rankings for every single book by the three Brontë sisters, Emily, Charlotte and Anne. I absolutely loved getting to know all the different characters in all these stories. Even the ones that I didn't like, I still in some ways enjoyed. I can't explain it. Like, I gave Shirley 2 stars. I'm still glad I read it. I'm really glad that I decided to dive into the Brontë collection of stories. I feel like my top 3 are very common. You know, like, everyone seems to love Jane Eyre and almost everyone loves Wuthering Heights. Tintinwell Hall, I feel like people don't talk about enough. I really wish Anne Brontë got more recognition. She's an amazing writer and she's always just seen as like the third Brontë, but her 2 books are really, really good. And I feel like if she had more time to write more books before she died, she could probably be like the most famous of them all. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and honestly, please let me know if you disagree with me down below. I would love to hear it, and I will see you in my next video.